A couple of years ago, I was on my way home from a friend's house. I resided in a rural area, so I frequently drove into town to socialize with friends. The exact details of that evening escape me, but our usual activities included bowling, catching a movie, or simply enjoying ice cream while hanging out in the park. However, time slipped away from us, and it was well past midnight when I finally embarked on the drive home. My house was approximately 5 miles from the highway, consisting of unlit dirt roads that could be quite eerie at night. The darkness was so profound that one couldn't even see their hand in front of their face if the lights went out. Due to this, I made a habit of driving cautiously during the night, as visibility was limited to around 15 or 20 feet ahead. This precautionary approach proved helpful for unexpected obstacles like deer or potholes. Considering the sparse population in the area, encountering a man walking along the roadside surprised me. I was about half a mile from the highway when my headlights revealed his presence. He stood there, waving with a friendly smile on his face. He was a robust, tall man with a mustache and an old baseball hat, appearing to be in his late 30s. Despite the potential warning signs, he didn't come across as threatening. Living in the countryside, where people often assist each other, may have contributed to my trusting nature. I slowed down, and as I came to a stop, he approached the driver's side window. "Howdy, ma'am. I'm sorry to bother you, but could I trouble you for a ride into town?" he asked. Without hesitation, I agreed. "Sure, hop in." "Thanks very much. I really appreciate it." "I'm Ricky," he responded graciously. "Well, you're welcome, Ricky." "I'm Sheila," I replied, perhaps naively, swayed by his politeness. I turned the car around, heading back to the highway. Since we were only half a mile in at that point, giving him a ride wasn't a significant issue. We engaged in small talk for several minutes, and his calm demeanor put me at ease, despite being alone in the car with a stranger. However, after barely 10 minutes, he dropped a bombshell. "I'm terribly sorry to have to do this, ma'am, but I'm going to need to take your car." I was stunned, unable to comprehend what I heard. "What are you talking about?" I pleaded. "Like I said, I need to take the car." "Let's not make this difficult," he calmly asserted. Before I could react, he pulled out a handgun and pointed it at me. My heart nearly stopped, and a look of sorrow crossed his face, as if he genuinely felt remorse for what he was about to do. I reluctantly brought the car to a stop and got out. Ricky took the driver's seat, and before driving away into the night, he said, "One more thing, ma'am. I'm going to need your phone. I can't have you calling the police on me." Speechless, I handed him my phone, my entire body shaking. "For what it's worth, I am sorry," he said before disappearing into the darkness. I walked for about half an hour before managing to flag down a police car. As we drove to the police station to file a report, I recounted the harrowing experience. The officer informed me that my description matched that of a man wanted for several armed robberies in this and nearby towns. It felt surreal to have such a polite and friendly person turn on me in an instant. I've always been someone eager to help others, but this incident has left me questioning my worldview. Why should I put myself at risk for someone who might intend to harm me? It's a decision we all must make for ourselves. I don't want to lose faith in the world, but it's something to ponder. Stay safe out there and watch out for each other. Something incredibly frightening happened to me when I was approximately 18 years old in the early 90s. At that time, my passion revolved around automobiles, and I enjoyed working on my cars, despite being a girl. I owned a 1979 Z28 Camaro with T-tubes, and during the summer, I would cruise around with my friends, seeking activities. One evening, while driving along the main street of a neighboring town, I noticed a small red truck trailing us from a distance. Accompanied by my friend Jessica, I expressed my concern about the truck possibly following us. To test this, I pulled into the driveway of a fast food restaurant, and to my dismay, the truck followed suit, maintaining a 3-car length distance. Attempting different directions didn't deter the persistent follower. Concerned, Jessica and I decided to head towards our home, which was around 30 minutes away, hoping the driver would give up. Unfortunately, he persisted, trailing us for almost an hour. Growing increasingly uneasy as it got late, we didn't want the stranger following us home. Contemplating our options, I decided the safest course of action would be to drive to the nearest police station. Shockingly, Jessica grabbed the steering wheel and abruptly veered the car to the right, causing me to scream in fear. Worried not only about the persistent truck but also about Jessica's erratic behavior, I reluctantly abandoned the idea of going to the police. As we approached a bridge and stopped at a red light on a one-way street, the red truck pulled up directly behind the car next to us. When the adjacent car turned right, allowing the truck to move forward, I looked over and was horrified to see the driver standing next to my car's passenger side door, with no pants on. The unsettling realization dawned on me that he likely hadn't had any pants on throughout the entire pursuit. Panicking, I ran the red light over the bridge, and somehow, Jessica remained oblivious to the disturbing sight. Driving through several more streets and into the countryside, the relentless pursuer stuck with us until, finally, we managed to shake him off by speeding through the middle of nowhere. Upon returning home, we attempted to put the harrowing experience behind us. Strangely, I never shared the incident with my parents, and I'm uncertain why. A few weeks later, I saw on the news that the police were searching for an individual in a small red truck. The picture they showed resembled the man who had followed us. While the description of the truck seemed slightly different, I always wondered if it was the same person. I finished my shift one night around 11 p.m. at a fast food joint located on the opposite side of the town from my residence. Despite the 45-minute drive through wet and slippery roads due to rain, I couldn't secure a better paying job, so I stuck with it. The first half of my journey home was cautious due to poor visibility in the rain, navigating through a somewhat rural area with paved roads that often led to unpaved ones. As the road cleared up, I picked up speed, driven by fatigue and the eagerness to get home and rest. Suddenly, I noticed a pair of red brake lights ahead. Despite slamming on the brakes, I couldn't avoid colliding with a car attempting to turn onto one of the country roads. I realized immediately that I had made a mistake. Although I wasn't injured, I was concerned about the potential financial cost as I wasn't earning much at the time. After pulling over and assessing the damage to my car, broken headlight and a significant dent, I wiped away a tear before stepping out. Rain continued to fall as I inspected the other car, which had pulled over in front of me. The other driver, a middle-aged man in a gray hooded sweatshirt and jeans, emerged, and I noticed a handgun on his hip, adding tension to the situation. He examined the damage to both cars, then approached me, blood dripping down his face from the impact. Despite my suggestion to report the accident, he insisted it was just a scratch and urged me to forget about it. Knowing the importance of reporting accidents involving injuries, I insisted on calling the police. However, his demeanor changed, and he became aggressive, invading my personal space. Intimidated by his armed presence, I agreed not to call, and he returned to his car. Shaken, I memorized his license plate as he drove away, then called the police to report the incident. They took it seriously, discovering that the car was stolen and had been used in an armed robbery. I went to the police station to provide a description of the man, despite my exhaustion. Eventually, he was caught and charged with multiple crimes. I paid $250 out of pocket for the damage to my car, but was never held responsible for the other car's damage. Money was inconsequential. The important part was ensuring that a dangerous individual was taken off the streets. If I had been more persistent in calling the police, I believe he would have posed a threat to me. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell to receive all new updates. Here's a paraphrased version of the text with changed names of people and places. So, here's a real-life incident that occurred in September 2020. I was on a trip to France, where most of my family and friends reside, except for those in the state of Texas. Without boasting, my family is quite affluent, even more than I can express. In fact, my aunt is a billionaire as of now. During that period, I had my personal supercar, a 2020 Ferrari Inferno SV, in France. I also have one back in the US. My wealthy cousins, who were also in France at the time, decided to take a drive on the French Autobahn with our high-performance cars. For those unfamiliar, the Autobahn is a highway in France with no speed limits. Our group included me and my cousins Michael, Jack, and Samuel. Michael had a Bugatti Chiron, Jack was driving his McLaren P1, and Samuel was in his Aston Martin Vulcan. We commenced our journey at 8 p.m. As we sped along at over 260 kilometers per hour, enjoying ourselves, I noticed something amiss with Michael. He was no longer with us. I glanced around to confirm my observation, and to my shock, he was indeed missing. I alerted my other cousins and urged them to pull over. When I explained the situation, they were just as puzzled and alarmed as I was. It seemed implausible for Michael to vanish suddenly at such high speeds. I attempted to call him, but he didn't answer. We then took the next course of action, wondering what could have happened. Certainly, here's a paraphrased version of the text with changed names of people and places. We could potentially receive a ticket, so we turned our vehicles around and headed in the opposite direction on the road to search for Michael. When we reached the spot where Michael was last seen, we decided to park our cars and explore the woods beside the lengthy expressway. Less than 3 minutes later, I could hear cries for help. It was Michael's voice. We sprinted towards the source of the cries only to discover something that still sends shivers down my spine today. As we ran, the cries for help remained at a consistent distance, as if Michael or whatever was impersonating him was moving away while calling for assistance. Panic set in, and we cried out in frustration as we searched relentlessly but couldn't find him. With tears in our eyes, we contacted Jack's parents, who were as horrified as we were. They called the authorities, and we waited for the police to arrive. A massive search operation unfolded, lasting for 3 days until Michael's Bugatti was located. Strangely, the car showed no signs of being involved in an incident. It was completely unharmed with no scratches, and nothing was missing from inside, except Michael. The search persisted but yielded no results. After a year, the case was closed, as no one could fathom how such an occurrence could take place unless it was a glitch in the system, akin to something from a sci-fi scenario. Fast forward to 2022, and I still yearn and shed tears for my beloved cousin. His car has been returned to us, and I occasionally drive it, holding on to the hope that he's somehow okay, or perhaps still alive and awaiting discovery. This incident, as unbelievable as it sounds, is true yet incredibly perplexing, sending chills down my spine. To grasp the significance of this narrative, it's essential to understand my background. I was born in 1954, and my formative years unfolded amidst the cultural influences of the 60s and early 70s in a quaint town in upstate Illinois. When I say it was small, I mean it, just one traffic light at Broadway and Main. The town centered around approximately 40 businesses, including a drugstore, soda shop, hardware store, small grocery store, Ben Franklin's, a gas station, and a barber shop. We had Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, and Catholic churches, with most residents attending one of them weekly. Additionally, there was a library, a post office, and a jail, a peculiar one where you could easily slip past the cop at the desk. 9 times out of 10, you could check if anyone was in the jail without bothering to inquire about their reasons for being there. As a curious free spirit and an entirely wild, innocent child, I later became part of the counterculture during the assassination of a prominent figure, the civil rights movement, Vietnam protests, and the hippie revolution. Hitchhiking was prevalent during those years, and for a little over 3 years, I embarked on numerous trips across the United States and Canada, much to my mother's dismay. Sometimes with friends, sometimes alone, always with no money, no clothes, and no worries. Despite numerous warnings about the dangers, my youthful naivety and a sense of invincibility led me to disregard all well-intentioned advice. This particular trip occurred in June 1969 when I was 14. I spent the night with my friend Diane in a nearby town and persuaded her to accompany me to San Francisco. Coincidentally, she had a brother living there whom she hadn't seen in a while. We traversed cow pastures to reach the highway, stuck out our thumbs, and predictably, rides weren't hard to come by. We encountered various experiences, from turning down a band's tour bus en route to Chicago to attending a lively party in the black neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio. Despite being the only white guests, we felt entirely welcome and safe. However, the journey took an unsettling turn when we picked up another hitchhiker, a lone guy who incessantly fretted about the legal repercussions of transporting two underage girls across state lines. Though annoying, he wasn't perilous. The situation escalated when the driver stopped for gas in Iowa. Dina and I went to freshen up in the restroom, only to return to the sight of cops waiting for us. This unexpected encounter led to our confinement in the Iowa City Jail, undoubtedly prompting immediate contact with our worried parents. While that part is a bit hazy in my memory, we certainly became quite the spectacle at the small detention center. The police officers engaged with us, chatting and playing cards, even bringing cigarettes, candy, and donuts. It didn't seem like we stayed there for an extended period before Dina's mom arrived to pick us up. After a discussion with her daughter, she generously offered to drive us the remaining distance to California, a journey of just over 1,900 miles, truly remarkable. I recall singing along to the radio throughout the trip, particularly to the Mama and Papa song, "Are You Going to San Francisco?" Upon reaching Nevada, we checked into a hotel in Reno, but it turned out to be far less exciting than I had anticipated. I tried to convince Dina to leave and strike out on our own, a realization that, as an adult, I understand would have been a selfish and terrible act with potentially devastating consequences for her mom. Fortunately, Dina refused, and we continued the journey. Finally, we arrived in San Francisco, right around Haight-Ashbury, close to Berkeley College, where the heart of the hippie movement was. Despite the presence of a mom figure, the entire experience overwhelmed me. While I was considered quite cool in our little town, this environment was beyond my league. My naivety became apparent, and I encountered firsthand the harsh realities of drug addiction at Needle Park, witnessing people strung out on drugs. Other distressing things unfolded that I won't mention explicitly, leaving me shocked. The desire to return home intensified, and to this day, I've never been back to California. The duration of that particular adventure remains unclear, but shortly after returning, I was watching TV at home with my mom in July. The news was filled with the Manson family and their infamous murders. It struck me then how close I had come to possibly falling into their clutches had I not stayed with Dina and her mom. Reflecting on what might have happened if I had ventured alone through the desert, 9 hours away from Spawn Ranch, or if that guy hadn't reported us to the cops in Iowa, sends shivers down my spine. Later, I learned that the Manson family was actively recruiting individuals from Haight-Ashbury, where we had been. I am grateful that I did not get entangled in that web, as I was particularly susceptible back then, especially if they had intercepted me before I reached California. I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this incident occurred a few months ago during a trip with my family for a hockey event. Although I don't play hockey, my siblings do. I'm generally quiet due to social anxiety, and I don't handle compliments well. We had just stopped at a familiar rest area, and I went inside with my 9-year-old sister. She suddenly ran ahead, and while I didn't mind initially, I soon wished she had stayed with me. A man, appearing to be in his mid-40s and of a different ethnicity, honked his horn at me seconds later. I jumped back as I was right next to his red four-door sedan. He began commenting on my appearance and suggested I get into his car. Being unsocial, I walked away without responding, and I ran inside to join my sister. We laughed it off, not thinking much of it, and continued on with my family. My brother, who was 16 and intimidating, and my 15-year-old sister, who was not intimidating, both play hockey and are stronger than me. We eventually reached our hotel after stopping at another rest area. I had forgotten about the earlier encounter when I noticed a red four-door sedan pulling in. I didn't pay much attention until I went to the restroom, and a man followed me, sitting on a bench as if waiting for someone. To avoid eye contact, I brought my little sister close, and we discussed video games. When my mom arrived, she told me to go back to the car. I always avoid talking to strangers and get nervous if someone says hi, avoiding eye contact with unfamiliar people. As I walked out, the man followed me, around my height, 5 feet 8 inches. He walked beside me, whispering something like, "You would look good tied to my bed." Though I don't remember the exact words, it was along those lines. I tensed up, ran to the car, and jumped into the back seat. Despite being scared, I only texted my friend about it, who reassured me that he was just a random creep. No need to worry, I followed her advice and pushed the incident out of my mind. I believed that was the end of the encounters, but I was mistaken. After arriving at our hotel, checking in, and heading to the ice rink, we realized it took longer than expected to reach the hotel. We had to rush to the rink immediately. Once again, I started to forget about the man. During the second period of the game, I sat outside the actual rink with my sister, not initially paying attention. We were engrossed in some multiplayer games when a man took a seat right beside me, inquiring about what I was playing. Feeling extremely uncomfortable, I shifted away, only for him to move closer. He began probing if I had a boyfriend, and I resorted to pointing to my ear, pretending to be deaf. Reflecting on it, it seemed pretty foolish, but I had a plan if he bought into it. Though my knowledge of sign language was limited, I knew enough to get by. Unfortunately, he didn't believe me and persisted with his questioning. I remained silent, ignoring him until he placed his cold hand on my thigh. Wearing leggings, I felt the chill, and when I jumped, he seized me in the game my sister and I were playing, where we could message each other. Swiftly, I looked at her and typed in the game chat, "Asked me to go to the bathroom with you." Understanding the situation, she leaned in and invited me to go to the bathroom. We hid there until the game concluded. I didn't encounter him until the next day's game. My sister fell ill that day, so I volunteered to stay with her at the hotel, primarily to avoid the man. After a few minutes, I heard a knock at the door, assuming it was my little sister getting breakfast downstairs. However, to my horror, it was the same man as before. His face bore a sinister grin, and before he could speak, I slammed the door shut and decided it was time to call the police. By that point, I was in tears as I sat against the door and dialed 911. They arrived shortly after, and the man was arrested. It turned out he had been taking pictures of me throughout the entire trip, relentlessly following me even when I was with my siblings, including during swimming. Since then, I never walk alone, hating the prospect, and sincerely hope I never encounter him again. It ranks as the second scariest thing in my life. This happened just a few days ago when I was on a road trip with my cousin James. The first was 13 and James was 21. James and I were on a road trip from our grandmother's to our aunt's house. I have a great relationship with my cousin, so my parents let me go on trips with him occasionally. It was about a 10-hour drive, and we were 3 hours into it. It was 9 p.m. at the time, and I was pretty tired, and everything was hilarious at the moment, so when I saw a red semi-true outside my window, I just started laughing. The man in the truck was heavy-set, to say the least, and he had a long, untamed beard. He had a creepy vibe. But I waved to him anyway. He in turn did some kind of groping motion to me. I found it more hilarious than creepy, and I started laughing harder and told James the story, doing the whole groping motion, and all he looked creeped out and disgusted. But there wasn't anything either of us could do. A while later, about 4.5 hours into the drive, James pulled into a rest stop. I walked into the bathroom, and when I came out, the man was just standing there. He looked to be at least 6 foot tall. I looked out the glass door leading into the building and saw James glaring daggers through the door. I was confused and walked back to the car. What he told me really creeped me out so much so that I started crying. Then again, I had been awake for around 20 hours. The man stared at me and followed me into the building, mumbling. James said he was basically talking normally. He attempted to comfort me, but quickly said that he had to go to the bathroom and went inside. A few seconds later, when I was in the car, the guy was at my window. He stared at me again. With a wide, creepy grin, he started saying that I should go with him and that he was going to treat me really well. He offered me candy and just tried to coax me into his truck. I was busy bawling my eyes out. Then, right on cue, James walked out and yelled at the guy and threatened him. The guy backed off and got back into his truck. He stared at me with that grin on his face. We fled out of there. We wanted nothing to do with this guy. It was around 12 a.m. when we pulled into the motel. To sleep the rest of the night till 8 a.m. was fine. The next morning we were at a restaurant eating breakfast, and that same guy sat across from us. He grinned at me. I looked over at James, and he was ready to explode with anger. The guy walked by our table on his way to the bathroom, and he brushed his hand on my shoulder, then did the same on his way back. It was definitely not an accident. Both James and I knew it. James was a chill dude, and he'd let almost anything slide. But because he's known me since I was a baby, he's very protective over me. He's not like that with any of my other siblings. He and I are close. He was obviously angry before, but at this point, he stood up from his seat and walked over to the guy's table. He started yelling at the guy to stop following us and back off. He made no threats, but he did curse a lot. I felt pretty nervous, and I just wanted to go. The guy stood up and smacked James, then yelled about how I was leading him on. Remember, I was 12 years old at the time. Their argument continued, and the cops came and separated them. They got the story and came to the conclusion that because he was assaulted, we could press charges. James decided not to, and we just continued the day. The rest of the trip was pretty bland. The guy wasn't seen for the rest of it. However, James did follow me like a bodyguard when we went anywhere. Even though he was protecting me, I was still terrified. I'm 14 years old, and I'm quite petite, standing at just under 5 feet and weighing 100 pounds. Due to my size, I often appear younger than my actual age. This incident occurred about a month ago during my family's relocation. After the moving truck had been loaded, I dozed off inside. An hour or two later, I woke up in a town near our new home. My grandmother had parked in a McDonald's parking lot, and I was still asleep. My 19-year-old cousin, whom we'll refer to as Alex, came to the passenger door to wake me up and asked for help with carrying the food. I agreed, and we entered the McDonald's. Alex placed an order, and when I finished using the restroom, I noticed an older man, perhaps in his mid-50s or early 60s, staring at Alex and then at me. Still groggy, I didn't pay much attention and joined Alex as she struggled to get soda from the machine. Eventually, she succeeded, and we left McDonald's. As I sat in the moving truck, sipping on my chocolate milkshake, I saw the man walking toward us. He claimed to know who we were and stopped at the driver's side where my grandmother was seated. Perplexed, she asked who she was, and he responded with the exact same tone, "The woman of God." He went on about taking care of us girls, and fear began to creep over me as unsettling thoughts from Reddit flashed through my mind. Suddenly, he pointed at me with a serious expression and declared, "You're a pain in the ass." Confused and scared, I awkwardly laughed and mumbled a response. He continued rambling, and Max called me, informing me that I had left my fries in the bag. Bewildered, as I already had my fries, I approached her to inquire. However, she diverted the conversation to the creepy vibes the man was giving off. After about 5 minutes, we mutually agreed that he was indeed unsettling. My grandmother then called out that it was time to leave. The man's car was blocking our path, so he got in and moved out of the way. Before driving off, he made the "I'm watching you" gesture with his fingers and silently mouthed, "I'm watching you." Concerned, I immediately called Max, urging her to ensure he didn't follow us. Fortunately, he didn't, but the thought of him watching us during the entire episode of getting our food and drinks still gives me the creeps.